Hi, welcome back to CUTV. We are covering the protests against the tuition fee increases. You've been watching some live footage from the streets. And now I'm here in studio with Stefan Christoph. So Stefan is a writer and community activist, and he's here to talk a little bit about the student strikes and the impacts also on society in general. So Stefan, you had just written an article that was posted on rabble.ca. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that article and what it was about?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that the current student strike in Quebec is the first step, I think, in a broader movement, not only in Quebec but across Canada, in opposition to austerity economics, in opposition to the economic model being pushed by the Conservative government that sees the economic crisis and the burden of that crisis being placed on students, working people, immigrants, because really the economic logic that's being pushed by the current government, the Liberal government of Charest here in Quebec, is that students need to pay the price for university education, which is a right, which is a public also institution. Universities are a public institution. And at the same time, we're seeing the government doing massive corporate tax cuts. Rio Tinto Alcan, for example, massive Quebec aluminum corporation, Bombardier, SNC-Lavalin, these corporations are getting breaks in the millions, whereas students are being asked to deal with a hike in tuition upwards of 75%. So I think that the context surrounding the strike right now in Quebec is really about the emergence of a broader critique of this whole austerity agenda that we're seeing pushed in Quebec, but also across Canada. So it's really important to understand that what's happening today on the streets in Quebec points to, I think, a larger opposition, a larger critique, a larger anger against economic policies being forced on populations that put the burden of the financial crisis on the most vulnerable.
Okay. So just recently on the World Socialist website, there was an open letter published by the International Students for Social Equality, and they put out a call and said that students must consciously reach out to the working class as allies in a common battle. So do you feel like that is happening? And what are the ways that we can sort of improve these outreach measures?
Well, Quebec has a long history of social movements. There's the student movement, of course, but also there's the labor movement, the unions, which you mentioned. I think it's important first just to note that Quebec tuition fees for university students are the lowest in Canada because of a history of struggle led by Quebec students. So we can look at the strike that happened in the late 1990s. There was a mass student strike that led to the freezing of tuition. That led to a more accessible post-secondary education infrastructure here in Quebec. And then there was a strike in 2005 again, where students actually won a very important demand from the Quebec government, and they saw the $103 million cut that then also the Charest Liberal government was trying to make to bursaries programs, basically reversed. So that was great. But today, what was significant and important, and it links to what you're saying, is that labor unions were supporting the strike in significant ways. We saw unions like the CSN, local unions from various university worker associations actively participating in the strike. There's also the CSQ, which is another union in Quebec. They had a contingent at the rally. So labor unions are actively supporting the strike because the strike is not just about students. It's about a broader vision of social justice for Quebec, right? So we're talking also about a broader critique of an economic program and a policy being enforced on Quebec by the Liberal government that targets not only students but also people in general, including workers. So we can see also that the labor unions have been supporting the strike, but most importantly are also facing a battle against the Quebec government. We're seeing, increasing attacks on the right to collective bargain here in Quebec. We've seen in recent years. So that also, I think, is linked to the reason why labor unions are supporting the student strike, because students have made it very clear it's about social justice, it's about a more equitable society, it's not just about tuition.
And we've seen this actually all across Canada, this right to collective bargaining being encroached upon by the government with the Canada Post strikes that happened. And also right now in British Columbia, actually, the government is legislating teachers back to work who have been on strike against cuts to education in British Columbia. So we talk about that there is a history of student movement and of movement in Quebec. So I guess it'll be interesting to see if it's able to catch on. I have seen on Twitter that there was a protest in solidarity in Alberta, I think at the University of Alberta. So there is some solidarity happening. I mean, do you think that we're going to be able to build these connections throughout Canada? Like, we do have sort of geographical challenges kind of that we face. I mean, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's important to think about the Quebec student strike that now is over 6 weeks old, now numbering upwards of 300,000 students on strike in a broader context. I think a lot of times as activists in Canada, as people who are fighting for social justice, a more equitable society, people often look south to the border. And of course, Occupy Wall Street was a huge inspiration for people in Canada, but across the world. But what we're seeing right now is our own Occupy Wall Street spark moment here in Quebec, in the sense that we're not going to see exactly the same thing happen in Canada as we saw in the US. And what I'm talking about is a popular response to an austerity agenda that places the burden of the financial crisis on workers, the poor, students. So what is the response to that agenda? We saw Occupy movement in the US. But I think it's important to look at what's happening today as a response in Quebec and in Canada that is similar, not of course in tactics, not in the same, it's not the same type of action, but it is a mass movement, right? And it has sparked the imaginations of people across Quebec. It's gotten to the point now where this is one of the main subjects of discussion on the metro, on the bus, in cafes, right? So it's caught the popular imagination. And when you catch the popular imagination, I think you reach a point of no return, right? And of course, what we're talking about is really, really important points, right? And I think the bottom line, or the red line of this strike, is that we are not going to allow Quebec to step into the same type of austerity economics that we saw pushed in the US, being pushed across the European Union, and now being pushed on the people of Quebec. People are saying enough is enough, the red line is here, we're going to fight and we're going to win.
Excellent.